This 1879 portrait seemed to depict a heartwarming reunion, but experts found something deeply disturbing about the enslaved girl within it. Dr. Amanda Chun, working at the Smithsonian's Conservation Lab in Washington, D.C., was captivated by the oil painting displayed on her computer screen. It was May of 2024, and she had spent months meticulously analyzing 19th-century American portraits as part of a project documenting art from the post-Civil War era. This particular painting, however, deeply troubled her. The artwork, dated 1879, showed two young women, both about 18 or 19 years old, sitting closely together in a garden. One woman, clearly white, wore an elaborate blue silk dress, her blonde hair styled in the fashionable way of the time. The other, a black woman, was dressed in a simpler brown dress, her dark hair neatly pulled back. Amanda was particularly struck by their positioning. They sat side by side on a stone bench, their shoulders almost touching, both wearing genuine smiles. This was quite unusual. Paintings from the post-war period rarely portrayed black and white subjects with such intimacy and equality. The painting had been donated by the Whitfield family of Charleston, South Carolina. A brass plate on the frame read, "Margaret and Clara, 1879. The donation note accompanying the artwork explained, "This portrait was found in our grandmother's attic in 1956. Margaret Whitfield was our ancestor. The identity of Clara is unknown." The painting had been hidden away for decades. Hidden away? The phrase stuck in Amanda's mind, a persistent question mark. She started standard conservation analysis, using X-radiography to examine the painting's layers. When the X-ray image finally appeared, Amanda gasped. There, hidden beneath layers of paint, were distinct. Amanda leaned back in her chair, her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't just a portrait of two young women. Hidden beneath the surface were symbols of bondage and enslavement, intentionally concealed by paint. Why would an artist paint shackles and then carefully cover them up? What was the true nature of the relationship between these women? And most importantly, why had this portrait been hidden away for so many decades? Amanda immediately contacted Dr. Evelyn Washington, a historian specializing in artifacts from the slavery era. "Evelyn, I found something extraordinary," Amanda explained, her voice filled with urgency. "A painting from 1879 depicting two friends, but X-rays have revealed shackles hidden beneath the paint. I need to know who these women were." Evelyn paused for a moment, absorbing the information. "Send me everything," she responded. "If there's a story buried here, we'll find it." Amanda began compiling files, acutely aware that she was about to uncover truths that someone had desperately tried to keep hidden. Evelyn arrived 2 days later, carrying a collection of folders related to the Whitfield family. They met in Amanda's lab, where the painting hung, appearing deceptively peaceful. "Tell me what you found," Evelyn requested. Amanda displayed the X-ray images. "Look closely around Clara's wrists and ankles," she instructed. The artist originally painted heavy iron shackles and then deliberately covered them with layers of paint. It would have taken significant effort to hide them so thoroughly. Evelyn leaned closer, her expression turning grave. "So, originally, Clara was shown in chains beside Margaret," she observed. "Then someone painted over the shackles to make them appear as equals." "Exactly," Amanda confirmed. "But why?" Evelyn opened her folder. "The Whitfields were wealthy Charleston plantation owners before the Civil War," she explained. Margaret Whitfield was born in 1860, making her 19 years old in 1879. As for Clara, her name doesn't appear in any official Whitfield records, but I did find something in their plantation records from 1860. Girl child named Clara, born March 1860 to enslaved woman Ruth, assigned to house duties." Amanda's chest tightened with a mixture of anticipation and dread. "So, Clara was born the same year as Margaret, on the same plantation?" she asked. "Yes," Evelyn confirmed. Enslaved children were often assigned as companions to white children. They would play together when they were young, although the relationship became unequal as they grew older. Evelyn continued, "By 1879, Clara would have been legally free. But Reconstruction was failing, and Jim Crow laws were emerging. Many Black women had little choice but to continue working for the families that had once enslaved them. Amanda turned her gaze back to the painting, a newfound understanding washing over her. Two women who grew up together, she mused, one as the master's daughter, the other as enslaved property. By 1879, slavery is over, but the shackles remain hidden beneath the paint. We need to find out what happened in 1879 specifically, Evelyn urged. Why was this portrait commissioned? Over the course of the following week, they dove into their research. They discovered that Margaret had married in 1881 and passed away in 1943. Clara's story, however, proved far more difficult to piece together. Sporadic mentions of her appeared in city directories as a domestic worker. There was no marriage record, and her trails seemed to disappear after 1885. Then, Amanda made a significant discovery, a letter tucked into the painting's frame, dated June 1879. Let this painting preserve our friendship for all time. The two women sat in stunned silence. They commissioned this secretly, Amanda said softly, to preserve their friendship. But the shackles, Evelyn whispered. Why paint Clara in shackles? That was the crucial question they needed to answer. Amanda meticulously examined every inch of the canvas, eventually discovering tiny letters hidden within the painted tree bark. T.W.W. Evelyn turned to Charleston records, finding a listing for Thomas Wright, a portrait painter with a studio on King Street, operating from 1872 to 1884. Even more significantly, the 1870 census listed Wright as mulatto, a free person of color who served both Black and white clients. This changes everything, Evelyn exclaimed. As a Black man, Wright understood the complexities of the situation. He understood what it meant for Margaret and Clara to be sitting together like this. Amanda studied the x-rays again. So, Wright deliberately painted Clara in shackles, she concluded. He was making a statement. Exactly. Evelyn agreed. He was painting the truth beneath the appearance. On the surface, they were two friends. Underneath lay the reality that Clara was still bound, not by literal chains, but by social, economic, and legal constraints. They unearthed Wright's 1876 advertisement. T. Wright, portrait artist, all clients welcome. The phrasing clearly signaled that he would paint Black subjects with the same dignity afforded to white subjects. Then, Evelyn discovered an August 1879 newspaper article. Local artist Thomas Wright has departed Charleston for Philadelphia, seeking greater opportunities in the North. Conditions have become untenable for Negro artists here. He left right after painting this portrait, Amanda observed. Margaret and Clara wanted a memorial to their friendship, but Wright made it more, a critique, a truth that powerful people wouldn't want revealed. And then he had to leave. Amanda finished her thought. They needed to understand why this painting had been hidden for decades. Who had hidden it and why? The answer, they suspected, would be even more heartbreaking than they could imagine. The portrait wasn't simply a memorial to a friendship. It was evidence of a tragedy that the Whitfield family had worked tirelessly to erase from history. Now, 145 years later, that tragedy was finally about to be revealed. Evelyn knew that truly understanding this painting required uncovering Clara's own perspective, her words, her letters, her diary entries, anything that documented her experience. She contacted the Avery Research Center in Charleston, a facility specializing in African American history. Their archivist, Marcus, was immediately intrigued by the story and began searching their collections. 3 weeks later, Marcus called with astonishing news. "We've found something extraordinary," he announced. A collection of letters written by formerly enslaved women, donated in the 1930s by a Black church. Among them are several letters written by someone named Clara, dated between 1877 and 1880. Evelyn immediately booked a flight to Charleston. The letters were fragile, written in careful handwriting on cheap paper, the only kind Clara could afford. One letter, dated May 1879, was addressed to Margaret. "Dear Margaret," it began, "I received your message about the portrait. I don't know if this is wise. Your parents would be furious if they discovered that we still meet in secret. But I confess my heart leaps at the thought of sitting beside you once more, as we did as children, before the world taught us. Perhaps the painting will prove that what we felt was real, even if no one else understands. Your friend always, Clara. Evelyn's hands trembled as she read the words. This confirmed that Margaret and Clara had secretly arranged for the portrait, against the wishes of Margaret's parents. Another letter, dated July 1879, written after the portrait was painted, revealed something far darker. Dear Margaret, it read, I cannot see you anymore. Your father discovered our portrait. He came to where I work, threatened me, said terrible things. He says that if I ever approach you again, he will ensure that I am arrested, that I will be sent to prison or worse. I know you tried to protect me, but we were foolish to think that we could preserve our friendship. The world will not allow it. Please do not try to find me. It will only bring more trouble. I must disappear, for both our sakes. Remember me kindly, Clara. Evelyn felt sick to her stomach. Richard Whitfield had discovered the portrait and threatened Clara to force her away from his daughter. She found one final letter, undated, but written in shakier handwriting. To whoever finds this, it began. My name is Clara. I was born enslaved on the Whitfield plantation in 1860. Margaret Whitfield was my friend from childhood. We grew up together, played together, shared secrets. When slavery ended, I hoped things would be different. But freedom is not freedom when you are still bound by poverty, by laws that deny you rights, by people who see you as property even without chains. Margaret tried to be my friend, still tried to preserve our bond through a portrait. But her father destroyed that dream. I left Charleston because I had no choice. I write this so that someone will know that I existed, that It was about two young women whose childhood friendship had been brutally destroyed by racism, and a father who simply couldn't accept that his daughter cared for a formerly enslaved woman. Evelyn shared the letters with Amanda, who sat in stunned silence after reading them. The shackles in the painting, Amanda said quietly. Wright painted them because Clara was still shackled by poverty, by Jim Crow laws, by men like Richard Whitfield, who would threaten and intimidate to maintain racial hierarchy. And Margaret knew it, Evelyn added. That's why she hid the painting after her father discovered it. She couldn't show it publicly, but she couldn't destroy it either. It was all she had left of Clara. To fully understand what happened after Richard Whitfield discovered the portrait, Evelyn turned to his personal papers. The South Carolina Historical Society held the Whitfield family collection, including Richard's correspondence from the 1870s. She found a letter Richard had written to his wife, Catherine, in July 1879. I have discovered something profoundly disturbing, it began. Margaret commissioned a portrait, without our knowledge or permission, showing herself sitting beside that Negro girl, Clara, who used to work here. They are positioned as equals, as friends. The artist, some mulatto from King Street, has created an abomination that suggests our daughter sees herself as equal to former slaves. I have dealt with the situation. I located Clara and made it clear that any further contact with Margaret will result in severe consequences. I have also ensured that the artist has left Charleston. The portrait will be destroyed. But the portrait hadn't been destroyed.
Why?
Evelyn found the answer in Catherine Whitfield's diary from August 1879. Richard demands that I destroy Margaret's portrait, Catherine wrote. He says it is disgraceful that it shows improper affection between our daughter and a Negro. I watched Margaret and Clara grow up together before the war, before everything changed. They were like sisters. I know the world says it was wrong, that Margaret should never have cared for a slave child as she did. But they were children innocent of the divisions we adults created. Margaret has been heartbroken since Richard drove Clara away. This portrait is all she has left. I cannot destroy it. I have hidden it in the attic instead. Perhaps someday, when these bitter times have passed, it can be understood for what it truly is, a testament to a friendship that society would not allow. Catherine had saved the painting. Despite her husband's orders, despite the immense social pressure, she had preserved this evidence of her daughter's love for Clara. Evelyn shared this discovery with Amanda. Catherine Whitfield was complicit in slavery. She benefited from it her entire life. But even she couldn't bring herself to destroy this painting. What happened to Margaret after Clara left? Amanda asked. Evelyn had found that too. Margaret married in 1881 to a man her father chose. She had 3 children and lived a conventional life. But I found something in her granddaughter's memoir, published in 1965. The granddaughter wrote, "Grandmother Margaret was a melancholy woman, often distant. She kept a locked drawer in her desk that no one was allowed to open. After she died, we found it contained letters from someone named Clara and a small portrait of them together. Mother ordered both burned, saying they were improper. I regret that we didn't preserve them. They seemed important to grandmother." So, Margaret kept Clara's letters her entire life, Amanda said softly. Locked away, hidden, but treasured. And the small portrait they mentioned, that was probably a copy or a photograph of the larger painting. The family destroyed that, but they did. 2 friends torn apart by racism, one threatened into disappearance, the other forced into a conventional life while secretly mourning her loss. But what happened to Clara after she left Charleston? That was the question that still needed answering. Tracing Clara's movements after 1879 was challenging. She had essentially disappeared from Charleston records, likely intentionally. Richard Whitfield's threats had forced her to leave the city entirely. Evelyn contacted genealogists specializing in African American family histories throughout the South. If Clara had moved to another city, she might have left traces, employment records, church registrations, census entries. After weeks of searching, they found a promising lead. Census records from Augusta, Georgia in 1880 listed a Clara, a Negro female, age 20, unmarried, working as a laundress. It wasn't certain proof, as Clara was a common name, but the age matched perfectly. And Augusta was close enough to Charleston that someone fleeing could reach it relatively easily. Evelyn traveled to Augusta, searching through city directories and church records. At the Springfield Baptist Church Archive, she found it. Clara, member since 1879, former resident of Charleston, South Carolina. The church records included a brief interview conducted in 1880 for their membership registry. When asked why she had come to Augusta, Clara had answered, "I left Charleston to escape a situation that had become dangerous. I seek to build a new life here." Evelyn found more. Clara had worked as a laundress in Augusta for 6 years, living in a boarding house for unmarried Black women. She had attended church regularly and participated in mutual aid societies, helping other formerly enslaved people. Then, in 1885, Clara's name appeared in marriage records. Clara married Samuel, a carpenter. Both of Augusta. Clara had found someone and had built a life beyond the tragedy of losing Margaret. She traced them through census records. 1890, Clara and Samuel living in Augusta with 2 children. 1900, 4 children. Samuel working steadily as a carpenter. Clara taking in laundry to supplement their income. But then Evelyn found Clara's obituary from 1903, published in the Augusta Chronicle. Clara, age 43, died of pneumonia. Survived by husband Samuel and 4 children. Known for her quiet dignity and kindness to all. Services at Springfield Baptist Church. Clara had died at 43, relatively young even for that era. The obituary was brief, mentioning nothing of her childhood, nothing of Charleston, nothing of Margaret. But Evelyn found one more document, a letter from Samuel, written to Springfield Baptist Church in 1904, donating his wife's few personal possessions to the church's historical collection. "My wife, Clara, rarely spoke of her childhood in Charleston," Samuel wrote. "She said those memories were too painful. But before she died, she told me about a friend from her youth, a white girl named Margaret, who had been kind to her when kindness was rare. She said they had their portrait painted together, trying to preserve that friendship before the world tore them apart. She never saw Margaret again, but thought of her often. Clara carried that loss her entire life. I donate these letters she kept, hoping they might matter to someone someday." Those were the letters Evelyn had found at the Avery Research Center. Clara had kept them until her death, and Samuel had preserved them. Clara had built a life, married, had children, and found some measure of peace, but she had carried the loss of Margaret with her forever. A childhood friendship destroyed by racism, a bond that society refused to allow. Evelyn returned to Washington with this profound information. Now, they had both sides of the story. Margaret, forced into a conventional life while secretly keeping Clara's letters locked away, and Clara, building a new life in Augusta but never forgetting the friend she had lost. And between them, hidden in an attic for decades, was a portrait that captured one brief moment when they had sat together as equals, attempting to preserve something that the world wouldn't allow them to keep. Amanda continued her analysis of the painting with a newfound understanding. Using infrared reflectography, she could discern even more details beneath the surface layers. The shackles around Clara's wrists weren't just symbolic. They were painted with extraordinary detail, suggesting that Wright had seen real shackles up close, and that he understood their weight and mechanism. But there was something else that Amanda discovered: faint lettering beneath the paint layers, hidden in the shadows of the painted garden. She enhanced the image, adjusting the contrast until the words emerged. Though the chains are hidden, they remain. Wright had written this message beneath the paint, knowing that it would be invisible but permanently part of the painting's truth. Amanda also found that Wright had originally painted tears on Clara's face, tiny tears at the corners of her eyes, and had then painted over them to make her expression appear happy. The X-rays showed those hidden tears clearly. He painted the truth first, Amanda explained to Evelyn. Clara sitting beside Margaret, shackled and crying. Then he painted over it to create the version that they could actually keep. Two friends smiling together, but the truth remained underneath, permanent. "It's brilliant and heartbreaking," Evelyn said. Wright had given them the painting they wanted while simultaneously preserving the stark reality that lay beneath. They researched Thomas Wright further, finding that he had settled in Philadelphia. His obituary mentioned that he had been known for portraits that captured the dignity of Negro subjects and the complex realities of freedom after slavery. Wright had likely painted dozens of similar works, portraits of formerly enslaved people where X-ray analysis might reveal hidden truths beneath the surface. His paintings were acts of documentation and quiet resistance, appearing acceptable on the surface, while preserving the harsh realities of the era underneath. Amanda and Evelyn decided to present their findings at a joint conference of art historians and scholars of African American history. The revelation about the hidden shackles would undoubtedly challenge how people understood post-Civil War portraiture. But first, they needed to do something else: find Clara's descendants. If Clara had 4 children in Augusta, those children might have had families of their own somewhere. Clara's great-great-grandchildren might be living completely unaware of this remarkable story. Evelyn contacted genealogists in Augusta, providing Clara's married name and her children's names from the census records. The search would take time, but if they could find Clara's family and share this story with them, it would make the discovery feel complete. Meanwhile, Amanda prepared the painting for exhibition. The Smithsonian wanted to display it alongside the X-ray images, showing the public how the shackles had been hidden beneath layers of paint, and how Wright had documented a profound truth while appearing to create a conventional portrait. 3 months later, Evelyn received a call from a genealogist in Augusta. "We've found them," she announced. "Clara's great-great-granddaughter is named Michelle. She lives in Atlanta and teaches history at a high school. I told her about your research. She wants to meet you." Evelyn and Amanda flew to Atlanta the following week, bringing photographs of the painting and all the documents they had painstakingly uncovered. Michelle was a woman in her 40s with the same gentle eyes of Clara, so evident in the portrait. When they showed her the painting, she stared at it for a long time in complete silence. "That's my great-great-grandmother," she whispered. "I've heard stories that she had been enslaved as a child in Charleston and that she had left suddenly and never talked much about her past. But we never knew why." They showed her the letters, the documents, the X-rays revealing the hidden shackles. Michelle began to cry as she read Clara's words, finally understanding the friendship with Margaret and realizing why her ancestor had carried such profound sadness. "She lost her friend," Michelle said, her voice filled with emotion. "A childhood friend ripped away because of racism, and she carried that loss for 43 years until she died." "Yes," Evelyn confirmed. "But she also survived. She built a life. She had a family. You exist because Clara was strong enough to start over in Augusta." Michelle nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of the information. "What happened to Margaret's family? Are there any descendants?" "Yes," Amanda replied. "The Whitfield family still exists in Charleston. We haven't contacted them yet. We wanted to speak with you first." "I want to meet them," Michelle said firmly. "I want Margaret's descendants to know that Clara never forgot their ancestor, that the friendship was real, and that it mattered." Evelyn contacted the Whitfield family, explaining what they had discovered about the portrait. After some initial hesitation, Margaret's great-great-grandson, David, agreed to meet. They arranged the meeting at the Smithsonian, where the painting was being prepared for the exhibition. David Whitfield arrived looking uncomfortable, a tall man in his 50s with. Initially, the 1879 portrait seemed to present Amanda Chun, employed at the Smithsonian's conservation facility nestled in Washington, D.C., discovered herself thoroughly engrossed by the oil-based artwork showcased upon her personal computer display. It was the month of May in the year 2024, and she had committed numerous months to diligently scrutinizing 19th-century American portraits as an integral component of an endeavor documenting artistic creations from the post-Civil War period. However, this particular artwork elicited deep unease within her. The artistic piece, bearing the date 1879, presented a visual narrative of two youthful women, approximately 18 or 19 years of age, seated intimately beside one another within a garden-esque backdrop. One of the women, evidently Caucasian, donned a meticulously crafted azure silken dress, complemented by her blonde hair styled in accordance with the prevailing fashion norms of the epoch. The other, a woman of African descent, was adorned in a simpler, brown-hued dress, her sable hair elegantly coiffed and drawn back. Amanda was particularly struck by their physical positioning. They were seated in close proximity, shoulder to shoulder, upon a stone-hewn bench, both exhibiting authentic smiles. This was certainly out of the ordinary. Artistic representations originating from the post-war timeframe seldom portrayed subjects of African and European descent with such a heightened degree of closeness and parody. The artwork had materialized as a benevolent contribution from the Whitfield kin residing in Charleston, South Carolina. A brass plaque affixed to the framework bore the inscription, "Margaret and Clara, 1879. The annotation accompanying the donation of the artwork elucidated, "This portrait was discovered within the attic space of our maternal grandparent in the year 19... Concealed from view?" The expression persisted in Amanda's cognitive processes, akin to a relentless interrogation. She commenced conventional conservation scrutiny, employing X-ray imaging techniques to meticulously assess the various strata of paint constituting the artwork. Upon the ultimate emergence of the X-ray depiction, Amanda emitted a gasp of astonishment. There, discreetly ensconced beneath coatings of paint, were conspicuous delineations circumscribing the African-American woman's carpal and ankle regions. Burdensome, unmistakably definable outlines, intentional camouflage covering manacles. Ferris shackles. Amanda reclined within her seating arrangement, her cardiac organ pulsating vehemently within her thoracic cavity. This was not merely a portrait depicting two youthful women. Disguised beneath the visible facade were symbolic representations of subjugation and enslavement, purposefully obscured via the application of paint. Why would an artisan depict chains and subsequently laboriously conceal them? What was the authentic essence of the connection linking these women? And, most significantly, for what rationale had this portrait been hidden away for so many decades in the past? Amanda forthwith established communication with Dr. Evelyn Washington, a historian specializing in artifacts originating from the epoch of slavery. "Evelyn, I have unearthed something quite extraordinary," Amanda conveyed, her vocal tone imbued with immediacy. A portrait dated 1879 portraying two acquaintances, but X-rays have brought to light manacles discreetly concealed beneath the pigmentation. I am in need of acquiring enlightenment regarding the identities of these women. Evelyn paused momentarily, internalizing the imparted information. Transmit everything to me, she responded. If a narrative is concealed within this, we shall unearth it. Amanda commenced the assembly of dossiers, acutely cognizant that she was on the precipice of divulging truths that an individual had frantically endeavored to keep clandestine. Evelyn materialized 2 days hence, bearing an assortment of files pertinent to the Whitfield genealogy. They convened within Amanda's workspace, wherein the artwork was suspended, portraying an outwardly serene countenance. "Apprise me of what you have uncovered," Evelyn requested. Amanda showcased the X-ray images. "Scrutinize intently around Clara's wrists and ankles," she instructed. The artist initially depicted robust iron shackles and subsequently purposefully obscured them with superimposed applications of pigment. Considerable exertion would have been requisite to conceal them so thoroughly. Evelyn leaned forward, her countenance assuming a somber mien. Thus, in its inception, enslaved progeny were frequently designated as companions to Caucasian children. They would partake in recreational activities conjointly during their formative years, albeit the affiliation metamorphosed into one of inequity as they matured. Evelyn persevered. By the year 1879, Clara would have attained legal emancipation. However, Reconstruction was encountering setbacks, and Jim Crow legal statutes were proliferating. Numerous African American women were afforded minimal recourse save to persist in laboring for the kin who had formerly held them in servitude. Amanda redirected her gaze back to the artwork, a newfound comprehension inundating her. 2 women who burgeoned conjointly, she mused, one as the scion of the proprietor, the other as chattel of servitude. By the year 1879, slavery has concluded, however, the shackles endure discreetly masked beneath the pigment. We are in exigency of ascertaining what transpired specifically during the year 1879, Evelyn exhorted. For what rationale was this portrait commissioned? Over the continuum of the ensuing hebdomad, they delved resolutely into their investigative endeavors. They unearthed that Margaret had entered into matrimony during the year 1881 and had passed away in 1943. Clara's saga, conversely, evidenced a markedly augmented degree of complexity in its reconstruction. Infrequent allusions to her appeared within municipal directories as a domestic employee. There existed no registry of nuptials, and her trajectory appeared to evanesce subsequent to 1885. Thereupon, Amanda effectuated a noteworthy revelation, a missive secreted within the artwork's framing, bearing the temporal designation of June 1879. Dearest Clara, the missive commenced, I am cognizant that this is prescribed. My progenitors would be incensed. However, I am unable to endure the notion that we shall soon be sequestered in perpetuity. You are my oldest confidant. Albeit the cosmos insists that we are disparate, my affective organ perceives otherwise. Permit this artistic rendering to conserve our amity for the duration of all time. The 2 women sat in profound silence, transfixed. They commissioned this surreptitiously, Amanda enunciated gently, for the purpose of conserving their amity. But the shackles, Evelyn murmured, for what rationale depict Clara in shackles? That constituted the quintessential inquiry necessitating resolution. Amanda meticulously probed each dimension of the canvas, ultimately uncovering diminutive appellations concealed within the depicted arboreal bark. T.W.W. Evelyn scrutinized the Charleston archives, ascertaining a registration for Thomas Wright, a portraiture artisan possessing a studio upon King Street, in operation spanning from 1872 to 1884. Even more significantly, the 1870 census enumerated Wright as mulatto, a liberated individual of color who catered to both African and European American clientele. This metamorphoses the entirety, Evelyn exclaimed. As an African American individual, Wright comprehended the intricacies of the circumstance. He apprehended what it signified for Margaret and Clara to be seated in such proximity. Amanda scrutinized the X-ray depictions anew. Thus, Wright purposefully portrayed Clara in shackles, she surmised. He was articulating a declaration. Precisely, Evelyn concurred. He was portraying the veracity ensconced beneath this superficial facade. Superficially, they were two acquaintances. Subjacent, rested the verity that Clara remained tethered, not via literal ligatures, but via societal, pecuniary, and juridical constraints. They exhumed Wright's advertisement dating to 1876. T. Wright, artisan of portraiture, all clientele welcomed. The wording distinctly signaled that he would depict subjects of African descent with the identical dignity accorded to subjects of European descent. Subsequently, Evelyn unearthed a newspaper article originating from August 1879. Indigenous artisan Thomas Wright has absented Charleston for Philadelphia, endeavoring to procure augmented prospects within the northern region. Circumstances have become untenable for artisans of Negro extraction herein. He absented himself proximately following the completion of this portrait, Amanda observed. Not a fortuitous conjunction, Evelyn assented. Wright depicted something hazardous. Margaret and Clara desired a memorial commemorating their amity. However, Wright rendered it as something augmented, a critique, a verity that influential individuals would not desire divulged. And subsequently, he was compelled to depart. Amanda consummated her cognition. They necessitated comprehension of for what rationale this artwork had been concealed for numerous decades. Who had concealed it, and with what motivation? The rejoinder, they suspected, would evidence an even more heartbreaking attribute than they could envision. The portrait was not solely a memorial commemorating an amity. It constituted substantiation of a cataclysm that the Whitfield genealogy had assiduously labored to obliterate from posterity. Presently, 145 years subsequent, that cataclysm was ultimately on the precipice of being divulged. Evelyn apprehended that genuinely apprehending this artwork necessitated the unveiling of Clara's own perspective, her verbal expressions, her missives, her diary notations, any component that chronicled her experiential tapestry. She established communication with the Avery Research Center nestled within Charleston, a facility specializing in the annals of African American extraction. Their archivist, Marcus, was forthwith intrigued by the narrative and commenced scrutinizing their compilations. 3 hebdomads hence, Marcus telephoned with astounding intelligence. "We have unearthed something quite extraordinary," he proclaimed. An assortment of missives authored by formerly enslaved women, contributed during the 1930s by a Negro ecclesiastic institution. Among these are sundry missives authored by an individual designated Clara, bearing temporal designations spanning from 1877 to 1880. Evelyn forthwith reserved a flight to Charleston. The missives were fragile, scripted in meticulous penmanship upon inexpensive stationery, the sole variant Clara could procure. One missive, bearing the temporal designation of May 1879, was addressed to Margaret. "Dearest Margaret," it commenced, "I have received your communication concerning the artistic rendering. I am uncertain whether this is judicious. Your progenitors would be incensed should they discover that we persist in convening clandestinely. However, I confess that my affective organ leaps at the contemplation of reoccupying my seating arrangement adjacent to you, as we did during our childhood, anterior to the cosmos instructing us that we were destined to be disparate. I shall arrive. I shall occupy my seating arrangement adjacent to you one terminal instance. Perhaps the artistic rendering shall substantiate that which we perceived was genuine, even in the circumstance that no other individual comprehends. Your Amy in perpetuity, Clara." Evelyn's manual extremities palpitated as she perused the locutions. This corroborated that Margaret and Clara had surreptitiously orchestrated the artistic rendering, contrarily to the volition of Margaret's progenitors. Another missive, bearing the temporal designation of July 1879, composed subsequent to the artistic rendering being painted, divulged something markedly somber. "Dearest Margaret," it perused, "I am unable to convene with you anon. Your progenitor unearthed our artistic rendering. He materialized at my locus of employment, menacing me, enunciating ghastly pronouncements. He articulates that should I at any juncture approach you again, he shall ensure my apprehension, that I shall be consigned to incarceration, or something of a more deleterious nature. I am cognizant that you endeavored to safeguard me. However, we were imprudent in our presumption that we could conserve our amity. The cosmos shall not sanction it. Kindly refrain from endeavoring to locate me. It shall solely precipitate amplified tribulation. I must evanesce, for both of our sakes. Recollect me affectionately, Clara. Evelyn experienced a sensation of illness within her digestive tract. Richard Whitfield had unearthed the artistic rendering and had intimidated Clara to compel her to sequester herself from his scion. She ascertained one terminal missive, undated, however, composed in more vacillating penmanship. To whomever unearths this, it commenced. My appellation is Clara. I was born into servitude upon the Whitfield plantation during the annum 1860. Margaret Whitfield was my confidante commencing from childhood. We burgeoned conjointly, partook in recreational activities conjointly, disseminated arcana. Subsequent to the cessation of servitude, I entertained the hope that circumstances would be. Okay, here is the English, U.S. translation, followed by the rewritten version, adhering to your specified constraints and rewrite mode : English, U.S. translation *. Blonde hair, much like Margaret in the portrait. Michelle was already there, standing before the painting, studying the image of her ancestor. David approached slowly, looking at the portrait for the first time. My family donated this painting years ago, he said. We never knew the full story, just that it had been hidden in our grandmother's attic. Your family tried to erase the story, Michelle said, her voice controlled but firm. Your ancestor, Richard Whitfield, threatened my ancestor, forced her to leave Charleston, and destroy her friendship with his daughter. David looked down, visibly ashamed. Dr. Washington shared the historical documents. I'm ashamed of what my ancestor did, David said, but Margaret, my great-great-grandmother, she tried to preserve this. She kept Clara's letters locked away her entire life. She kept the letters while living in comfort, Michelle replied, her voice tinged with bitterness. My ancestor lost everything, her friend, her home, her childhood. She had to start over in a strange city with nothing. The tension in the room was palpable. Evelyn gently intervened. Both women were victims of a system that wouldn't allow their friendship. Margaret couldn't defy her father openly, without being disowned. Clara had no power to fight back. The real villain was the pervasive racism that made their friendship impossible. They stood together in silence, gazing at the painting where their ancestors sat side by side, smiling, preserved in a fleeting moment of equality, an equality that the world had refused to grant them in life. Finally, David spoke. I want to help correct this, he said. My family has resources. We could create a scholarship in Clara's name. We could support the exhibition. We could ensure that her story is told alongside Margaret's. Michelle considered this offer. Clara didn't want charity, she said. She wanted dignity, equality, the right to be friends with someone without facing threats and violence. I understand, David replied. But I can't change the past. I can only try to honor these women's memories now. They tried to preserve their friendship through this painting. I can help tell their story. Michelle finally nodded. All right, she conceded. But Clara's story must be told fully, not sanitized, not made comfortable. The truth about the shackles, the threats, the loss, everything. Everything, David agreed. Over the course of the following months, they worked together, meticulously planning the exhibition. Michelle provided family photos of Clara's descendants and documents detailing Clara's life in Augusta. David contributed Whitfield family records, including Catherine's diary and Margaret's life story, was to be told. The exhibition would feature the painting itself, along with X-rays that revealed the hidden shackles. It would also showcase letters exchanged between the two women and meticulously trace the paths their lives took after their forced separation. Contemporary photographs would also be on display. Michelle in front of her students, passionately teaching African American history, and David at his architecture firm in Charleston, dedicated to designing affordable housing. Both individuals were living fulfilling lives, a testament to the strength and resilience of their ancestors, who had persevered through unimaginable hardships. The exhibition's title, Hidden Chains, was chosen with great care, representing a friendship that managed to endure on canvas, even though it could not survive in the real world. Before the grand opening, Michelle and David stood together, gazing at the painting one last time. "They look happy here," Michelle observed quietly, her voice filled with emotion. In this one moment, captured by an artist who truly understood their truth, they got to be just two friends sitting together. "Right gave them that gift," David agreed, acknowledging the artist's ability to convey their bond, even while acknowledging the painful reality of the shackles hidden beneath the surface. "I hope they knew," Michelle said, her voice filled with hope. "I hope Margaret and Clara somehow knew that 145 years later, their descendants would stand here together, telling their story, honoring the bond they tried so hard to preserve." They stood in silence, two people connected by a friendship their ancestors had shared, however briefly, before the world cruelly tore them apart. Now they were working together to ensure that that friendship was finally remembered and honored. The exhibition made its debut at the Smithsonian in March 2025. The gallery was teeming with people, historians, art conservators, descendants of enslaved people, journalists, and curious visitors who had heard about the hidden shackles revealed beneath the surface of the portrait. The painting was prominently displayed in the center of the main wall, bathed in a spotlight. On either side of it were large displays that offered deeper insights. To the left, the X-ray images were displayed, starkly revealing the shackles that had been painted around Clara's wrists and ankles, the hidden tears on her face, and the secret message Wright had embedded beneath the layers of paint. On the right, visitors could view the final version of the portrait, the one that depicted two women sitting peacefully together, their faces adorned with smiles. The exhibition text explained, in 1879, two young women who had grown up together on a South Carolina plantation, one as the master's daughter, the other as enslaved property, secretly commissioned this portrait to preserve their childhood friendship. Margaret Whitfield and Clara were both 19 years old, 14 years after slavery's end. They hoped this painting would serve as proof that their bond was real, even as society insisted that they remain separate and unequal. The artist, Thomas Wright, a free man of color, painted a profound truth. He initially depicted Clara in shackles, tears streaming down her face, to illustrate the painful reality that freedom had not truly ended her bondage to poverty, racism, and the pervasive social constraints. He then painted over these elements, creating the serene scene that the women could actually keep and display. But beneath the paint, the truth remained, permanent and undeniable, patiently waiting for 145 years to be revealed. Visitors moved through the exhibition in hushed tones, carefully reading letters from both women, learning about Richard Whitfield's threats, and discovering the circumstances under which the painting had been hidden away for decades. One section was dedicated to Clara's life after she left Charleston, including her marriage, her children, and Samuel's letter, which served to preserve her memory. Another section showcased Margaret's life, her conventional marriage, the locked drawer where she kept Clara's letters, and her granddaughter's account of burning those letters after Margaret's death. The exhibition also shed light on Thomas Wright's story, showcasing his other portraits, his flight to Philadelphia, and his death in 1891. Several other Wright paintings were displayed alongside, and infrared analysis suggested that they, too, might contain hidden truths concealed beneath their surfaces. But the most powerful and moving moment of the exhibition came in the final room, where large photographs showed Michelle and David standing together before the portrait. Their own stories were displayed alongside those of their ancestors, creating a powerful connection between the past and the present. Michelle had written a statement that read, "My great-great-grandmother Clara survived slavery, survived being torn from her childhood friend, survived threats and poverty and racism. She built a life in Augusta, raised 4 children, and passed down to her descendants a legacy of resilience. I teach history because Clara believed in education, because she understood that telling the truth about the past helps us build a better future." This painting almost remained hidden forever, just like so many Black women's stories are hidden, erased, forgotten. But Clara's story survived. It survived in letters, in a painting beneath a painting, in the memories passed down through generations. And now her story will be known. David had written, "My great-great-grandmother Margaret tried to preserve a friendship that the world wouldn't allow. She failed. Racism and her father's cruelty destroyed what she and Clara had built. But she never stopped caring. She kept Clara's letters locked away for 60 years, unable to share them, but unable to destroy them. Margaret was complicit in a system of oppression by her position and privilege, even as she personally cared for someone that system oppressed. Her story is complicated, uncomfortable, but it's important to tell to show how racism harmed everyone, even those who benefited from it in material ways. I can't undo what my ancestor Richard did, but I can honor what Margaret tried to preserve and what Clara survived." The exhibition quickly became one of the Smithsonian's most visited attractions. News coverage was extensive, and scholars began analyzing other Thomas Wright paintings, uncovering even more hidden truths. The story of Margaret and Clara ignited conversations about childhood friendships that crossed racial lines, about how the end of slavery did not end the harm caused by racism, and about the complicated and nuanced relationships between white and Black women in the post-war South. 6 months after the exhibition opened, Michelle received a package at her home in Atlanta. Inside was a letter from an elderly woman in Charleston named Patricia. The letter read, "Dear Michelle, I'm 92 years old, and I was Clara's youngest daughter. Yes, your great-grandmother. I'm still alive. I saw the news about the exhibition and wanted you to know that I remember my mother. She died when I was 3, but I have one memory. She showed me a small drawing she'd kept hidden, a sketch of herself and another young woman sitting together. She told me, 'This was my friend Margaret. The world said we couldn't be friends, but we were. Remember that? The world is often wrong about who deserves love. I've kept that drawing for 89 years. I'm sending it to you now. It should be with the portrait.'" Michelle opened the package with trembling hands. Inside, carefully wrapped, was a small pencil sketch on aged paper. It depicted 2 young girls, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, holding hands and smiling. At the bottom, in a child's handwriting, were the words, "Margaret and Clara, 1867. They had drawn this themselves as children, 12 years before the formal portrait, when their friendship was still innocent, and the full weight of racial hierarchy had not yet crushed them." Michelle immediately contacted Amanda and Evelyn. The sketch was added to the exhibition and displayed in a case alongside Patricia's letter, demonstrating that even 3-year-old Patricia had absorbed her mother's message about the enduring power of friendship across racial lines. Michelle visited Patricia in Charleston. The elderly woman wept as she looked at photographs of her mother's descendants, 4 generations she had never had the chance to meet, all thriving, all educated, all carrying forward Clara's legacy. "Mama would be so proud," Patricia whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "She always said education was everything, that we had to learn and grow, and never let anyone make us feel small. She learned that from her childhood," Michelle explained. "Margaret taught her to read when they were children, before it was discovered and punished. That's why your mother valued education so deeply," Patricia nodded. "Mama never forgot Margaret. Even at the end, she spoke about her friend from childhood. She said, 'Some friendships are so true that not even the world's cruelty can completely destroy them.'" The exhibition was extended for another year due to its overwhelming popularity. Schools brought students to see it, using Margaret and Clara's story to teach about the lasting legacy of slavery, the persistence of racism, and the inherent human capacity for connection that transcends artificial divides. Michelle and David became friends themselves, a friendship forged through their shared work and their commitment to honoring their ancestors. They spoke together at conferences, co-authored articles, and advocated together for teaching difficult histories with honesty and integrity. 5 years after the exhibition opened, Michelle published a book titled Hidden Chains: My Great-Great-Grandmother's Story and the Friendship That Survived in Paint. The book combined Clara's letters, the painting's history, and Michelle's own reflections on what it meant to uncover this remarkable story. In the book's final chapter, Michelle wrote, "I teach my students that history isn't just a collection of dates and events. It's about people, relationships, love, loss, and survival. Margaret and Clara loved each other as children, before the world taught them that they shouldn't. They tried to preserve that love through a portrait, but racism proved to be a formidable force. Clara lost her friend, her home, and everything that was familiar to her. But she refused to let that loss define her or destroy her spirit. She built a new life, raised children, and passed down stories and values that ultimately reached me 5 generations later. The shackles that Thomas Wright painted weren't simply historical artifacts. They represented the chains that continue to exist in different forms, even today. But Clara's resilience, her unwavering refusal to be defined solely by the injustices that were inflicted upon her, also survives. It survives in me, in my students, and in everyone who learns her story and refuses to allow histories like hers to be hidden, erased, or forgotten." The portrait remained on permanent display at the Smithsonian, with the X-rays permanently displayed beside it, providing a stark and compelling contrast. Visitors from around the world came to see it, to witness the friendship captured on the surface, the shackles hidden beneath, and the truth that Thomas Wright had preserved across the span of 145 years. And in Atlanta, Michelle kept Patricia's childhood sketch in her office at school, showing it to her students and telling them the story of 2 little girls who had held hands and drawn pictures together, blissfully unaware of the world's attempts to tear them apart. "But look," she would tell her students, pointing first at the sketch and then at photographs of the formal portrait. "They fought to stay connected. Margaret commissioned that painting. Clara kept the letters. Thomas Wright painted the truth that lay hidden beneath the surface. And now, all these years later, we know their story. We know they mattered. We know their friendship was real. The chains were hidden," she would continue. "But so was the resistance. So was the love. So was the truth. And truth has a remarkable way of surviving. Even when it's buried beneath layers of paint, even when it's hidden away in attics, even when powerful people attempt to erase it, truth endures. And so do we." Rewritten version, U.S. English. Just change the words. Her blonde hair resembled Margaret's in the portrait. Michelle was already present, standing in front of the painting and examining the image of her forebear. David came closer at a leisurely pace, viewing the portrait for the initial time. "My folks gave this artwork years back," he stated. "We were never familiar with the complete account, only that it had been concealed in our grandma's attic." "Your family attempted to wipe out this account," Michelle declared, her tone restrained yet resolute. "Your ancestor, Richard Whitfield, menaced my ancestor, compelled her to depart Charleston, and wrecked her amity with his offspring." David gazed downward, evidently mortified. Dr. Washington disseminated the historic archives. "I'm mortified by what my ancestor perpetrated," David expressed, "but Margaret, my great-great-grandma, she endeavored to safeguard this. She retained Clara's missives stowed away her entire lifespan. She stashed away the missives while existing in luxury," Michelle retorted, her articulation brushed with resentment. "My ancestor forfeited everything, her chum, her domicile, her youth. She was compelled to commence anew in an unfamiliar metropolis bereft of anything." The strain in the chamber was unmistakable. Evelyn gently stepped in. Both gals were sufferers of a framework that wouldn't sanction their companionship. Margaret couldn't flout her father overtly without being cast off. Clara possessed no authority to retaliate. The authentic scoundrel was the ubiquitous bigotry that rendered their camaraderie unfeasible. They were stationary together in quietness, staring at the artwork where their progenitors perched adjacent to one another, grinning, conserved in a fleeting instant of parody, a parody that the globe had declined to bestow upon them in existence. Ultimately, David vocalized. "I aspire to assist in rectifying this," he proclaimed. "My kin possesses means. We could institute a grant in Clara's denomination. We could bolster the exposition. We could assure that her narrative is recounted alongside Margaret's. Michelle pondered this proposition. Clara craved no philanthropy, she articulated. She craved dignity, impartiality, the entitlement to be companions with somebody without confronting intimidations and brutality. I comprehend, David answered. But I'm unable to alter the bygone. I can merely endeavor to venerate these women's recollections presently. They attempted to preserve their fellowship via this artwork. I can facilitate in recounting their chronicle. Michelle ultimately consented with a nod. All right, she conceded. Nonetheless, Clara's narrative must be recounted completely, not sanitized, not rendered comfortable. The veracity regarding the manacles, the menaces, the forfeiture, everything. Everything, David concurred. Across the duration of the ensuing months, they collaborated, thoroughly arranging the exposition. Michelle furnished familial snapshots of Clara's successors and documents specifying Clara's existence in Augusta. David bestowed Whitfield household files, encompassing Catherine's journal and Margaret's existence tale was to be told. The exposition would showcase the artwork itself, coupled with X-rays that unveiled the concealed restraints. It would likewise exhibit epistles exchanged amid the duo and meticulously pursue the trajectories their existences adopted following their enforced parting. Contemporary portraits would additionally be on display. Michelle confronting her scholars, ardently tutoring African-American antiquity, and David at his architectural bureau in Charleston, committed to conceiving reasonably priced lodging. Both folks were inhabiting gratifying existences, a proof to the fortitude and suppleness of their forebears, who had persevered through inconceivable adversities. The exposition's designation, Hidden Chains, was designated with considerable circumspection, symbolizing a camaraderie that managed to endure on canvas, notwithstanding it couldn't thrive in the tangible realm. Prior to the grand commencement, Michelle and David stood together, gazing at the artwork one final occasion. They appeared joyous here, Michelle remarked softly, her articulation saturated with sentiment. In this singular instant, seized by an artisan who genuinely apprehended their veracity, they were permitted to be merely a pair of acquaintances perched collectively. Right bestowed them that present, David assented, recognizing the artisan's aptitude to transmit their bond, even while acknowledging the agonizing actuality of the restraints concealed beneath the veneer. I aspire they knew, Michelle verbalized, her articulation brimming with expectation. I aspire Margaret and Clara somehow were cognizant that 145 years subsequently, their progeny would stand here together, recounting their narrative, venerating the bond they toiled diligently to conserve. They stood in tranquility, a duo linked by a camaraderie their antecedents had participated in, however fleetingly, prior to the planet heartlessly sundered them. Presently, they were collaborating to guarantee that that friendship was finally reminisced and esteemed. The exposition inaugurated at the Smithsonian in March 2025. The gallery was teeming with individuals, chroniclers, art conservators, successors of enslaved individuals, reporters, and inquisitive sightseers who had eavesdropped about the concealed manacles unveiled beneath the veneer of the portrait. The artwork was conspicuously exhibited in the epicenter of the principal bulwark, immersed in illumination. On either flank of it were vast displays that extended profounder perceptions. To the larboard, the X-ray images were exhibited, starkly disclosing the restraints that had been painted around Clara's wrists and ankles, the concealed tears on her visage, and the confidential message Wright had embedded beneath the strata of paint. On the right, visitors could view the ultimate rendition of the artwork, the one that depicted a duo of women perched serenely collectively, their visages embellished with grins. The exposition text expounded, in 1879, a duo of youthful women who had matured collectively on a South Carolina plantation, one as the master's daughter, the other as enslaved property, surreptitiously commissioned this portrait to conserve their childhood camaraderie. Margaret Whitfield and Clara were both 19 years aged, 14 years post-slavery cessation. They aspired this artwork would function as verification that their bond was authentic, even as society insisted that they remain distinct and inequitable. The artisan, Thomas Wright, a free man of color, painted a profound veracity. He initially depicted Clara in restraints, tears coursing down her visage, to illustrate the agonizing actuality that emancipation had not genuinely terminated her subjugation to penury, bigotry, and the pervasive societal constraints. He then painted over these constituents, creating the serene scene that the women could actually retain and exhibit. But beneath the paint, the veracity lingered, permanent and undeniable, patiently biding for 145 years to be unveiled. Visitors traversed through the exposition in hushed inflections, meticulously scrutinizing missives from both women, assimilating about Richard Whitfield's intimidations, and uncovering the circumstances under which the artwork had been concealed away for decades. One segment was consecrated to Clara's existence subsequent to her departure from Charleston, encompassing her matrimony, her offspring, and Samuel's epistle, which functioned to conserve her remembrance. Another segment showcased Margaret's existence, her conventional nuptials, the secured drawer where she stowed away Clara's missives, and her granddaughter's account of incinerating those missives following Margaret's demise. The exposition also illuminated Thomas Wright's narrative, showcasing his other portraits, his flight to Philadelphia, and his demise in 1891. Several other Wright artworks were exhibited juxtaposed, and infrared scrutiny proposed that they, too, might harbor concealed veracities secreted beneath their veneers. But the most potent and poignant instant of the exposition materialized in the concluding chamber, where vast photographs manifested Michelle and David standing collectively before the portrait. Their personal narratives were exhibited juxtaposed those of their progenitors, generating a potent connection amid the bygone and the present. Michelle had scribbled a declaration that perused, "My great-great-grandma Clara endured enslavement, endured being severed from her childhood chum, endured intimidations and penury and bigotry. She constructed an existence in Augusta, reared 4 offspring, and conveyed down to her successors a heritage of resilience. I instruct history because Clara believed in edification, because she comprehended that recounting the veracity regarding the bygone assists us in constructing a superior prospect." This artwork almost lingered concealed eternally, just as numerous Black women's narratives are concealed, erased, forgotten. But Clara's narrative endured. It endured in missives, in an artwork beneath an artwork, in the recollections conveyed down through generations. And presently her narrative will be known. David had scribbled, "My great-great-grandma Margaret endeavored to conserve a camaraderie that the globe wouldn't sanction. She floundered. Bigotry and her father's malevolence wrecked what she and Clara had constructed. But she never ceased caring. She retained Clara's missives secured away for 60 years, incapable of disseminating them, but incapable of demolishing them. Margaret was complicit in a framework of oppression by her position and privilege, even as she personally cared for somebody that framework oppressed. Her narrative is intricate, uneasy, but it's vital to recount to demonstrate how bigotry harmed everyone, even those who benefited from it in material manners. I'm unable to undo what my ancestor Richard perpetrated, but I can venerate what Margaret endeavored to conserve and what Clara endured." The exposition swiftly evolved into one of the Smithsonian's most frequented enticements. News coverage was comprehensive, and scholars commenced scrutinizing other Thomas Wright artworks, uncovering even more concealed veracities. The narrative of Margaret and Clara ignited dialogues regarding childhood amities that traversed racial demarcations, regarding how the cessation of enslavement didn't terminate the detriment engendered by bigotry, and regarding the intricate and nuanced relationships amid white and Black women in the post-war South. 6 months subsequent to the exposition's inauguration, Michelle received a package at her abode in Atlanta. Within was an epistle from an elderly woman in Charleston named Patricia. The epistle perused, "Dear Michelle, I'm 92 years aged, and I was Clara's youngest offspring. Yes, your great-grandma. I'm still alive. I espied the news regarding the exposition, and aspired you to be cognizant that I reminisce my mother. She perished when I was 3, but I possess one recollection. She manifested me a diminutive drawing she'd retained concealed, a sketch of herself and another youthful woman perched collectively. She verbalized to me, 'This was my chum Margaret.' The Globe verbalized we couldn't be chums, but we were. Reminisce that? The Globe is frequently erroneous regarding who merits affection. I've retained that drawing for 89 years. I'm dispatching it to you presently. It should be with the portrait. Michelle unfurled the package with quivering appendages. Within, meticulously enveloped, was a diminutive pencil sketch on aged paper. It depicted a duo of youthful gals, perhaps 7 or 8 years aged, clutching hands and grinning. At the nadir, in a child's handwriting, were the utterances Margaret and Clara, 1867. They had drafted this themselves as youngsters, 12 years prior to the formal portrait, when their camaraderie was still innocent, and the complete heft of racial hierarchy hadn't yet pulverized them. Michelle promptly contacted Amanda and Evelyn. The sketch was appended to the exposition and exhibited in a case adjacent to Patricia's epistle, demonstrating that even 3-year-old Patricia had assimilated her mother's message regarding the enduring potency of amity across racial boundaries. Michelle visited Patricia in Charleston. The elderly woman wept as she scrutinized snapshots of her mother's progeny, 4 generations she had never had the opportunity to encounter, all thriving, all educated, all carrying forth Clara's heritage. "Mama would be so proud," Patricia murmured, her articulation saturated with sentiment. "She always verbalized edification was everything, that we had to learn and grow, and never let anyone cause us to feel diminutive." "She learned that from her childhood," Michelle elucidated. "Margaret tutored her to peruse when they were youngsters, prior to it being discovered and penalized." "That's why your mother valued edification so deeply," Patricia nodded. "Mama never forgot Margaret. Even at the conclusion, she spoke regarding her chum from childhood. She verbalized, some amities are so authentic that not even the world's malevolence can completely demolish them." The exposition was prolonged for another year, attributable to its overwhelming vogue. Schools conveyed scholars to witness it, employing Margaret and Clara's narrative to tutor regarding the enduring heritage of enslavement, the persistence of bigotry, and the inherent human capacity for connection that transcends artificial separations. Michelle and David evolved into chums themselves, a camaraderie forged through their shared toil and their commitment to venerating their antecedents. They verbalized collectively at conferences, co-authored articles, and advocated collectively for tutoring arduous histories with honesty and probity. 5 years subsequent to the exposition's inauguration, Michelle published a tome titled Hidden Chains, My Great-Great-Grandmother's Narrative and the Camaraderie That Survived in Paint. The tome combined Clara's missives, the painting's antiquity, and Michelle's personal reflections on what it signified to uncover this remarkable narrative. In the book's concluding chapter, Michelle scribbled, "I instruct my scholars that history isn't merely a compilation of dates and events. It's regarding people, relationships, affection, forfeiture, and survival." Margaret and Clara adored each other as youngsters, prior to the Globe tutoring them that they shouldn't. They attempted to conserve that affection through a portrait, but bigotry proved to be a formidable force. Clara forfeited her chum, her domicile, and everything that was familiar to her. But she declined to let that forfeiture define her or demolish her spirit. She constructed a new existence, reared offspring, and conveyed down narratives and values that ultimately reached me 5 generations subsequently. The restraints that Thomas Wright painted weren't simply historical artifacts. They represented the chains that continue to exist in different forms, even today. But Clara's resilience, her unwavering refusal to be defined solely by the injustices that were inflicted upon her, also survives. It survives in me, in my scholars, and in everyone who learns her narrative and refuses to allow histories like hers to be concealed, erased, or forgotten. The portrait lingered on permanent display at the Smithsonian, with the X-rays permanently exhibited adjacent to it, furnishing a stark and compelling contrast. Visitors from around the globe arrived to witness it, to witness the camaraderie captured on the veneer, the restraints concealed beneath, and the veracity that Thomas Wright had conserved across the expanse of 145 years. And in Atlanta, Michelle retained Patricia's childhood sketch in her office at school, manifesting it to her scholars and recounting them the narrative of a duo of little gals who had clutched hands and drafted pictures collectively, blissfully oblivious of the world's attempts to sunder them. But behold, she would verbalize to her scholars, indicating initially at the sketch and subsequently at snapshots of the formal portrait. They fought to linger connected. Margaret commissioned that artwork. Clara retained the missives. Thomas Wright painted the veracity that lay concealed beneath the veneer. And presently, all these years subsequently, we are cognizant of their narrative. We are cognizant they mattered. We are cognizant their camaraderie was authentic. The chains were concealed, she would proceed. But so was the resistance. So was the affection. So was the veracity. And veracity possesses a remarkable manner of surviving. Even when it's buried beneath strata of paint, even when it's concealed away in attics, even when powerful people attempt to erase it, veracity endures. And so do we.